Today, we are witnessing one of the most serious strikes against Russia's energy infrastructure since the beginning of the war. Ukrainian drones have once again hit oil facilities deep inside Russian territory, and this time, the scale of the damage is impossible to ignore. But this is not only about fire and smoke. It's about Russia's weakening economy, about nervous shifts in rhetoric from figures like Igor Girkin, about Donald Trump's unexpected comments on Ukraine, and even a rare 5-hour meeting between Putin and Lukashenko. All of these stories may seem separate, but together they show us one thing: Russia is in trouble, both on the battlefield and far beyond it. In the past 48 hours, Ukrainian drones targeted key oil facilities in several Russian regions. In Chuvashia, explosions tore through an oil pumping station. Fires spread quickly, forcing emergency crews to shut down operations. Local residents reported massive flames lighting up the night sky. Why does this matter? Russia's oil exports are the financial backbone of its war effort. Every time a refinery or pumping station is knocked out, it disrupts production, cuts into profits, and increases pressure on the Kremlin. And this isn't an isolated incident. Ukraine has systematically expanded its drone campaign, from Belgorod to Bryansk, from Tatarstan to now deep inside central Russia. Think about the message. If Ukraine can strike hundreds of kilometers inside Russian territory, nowhere is safe anymore. This campaign has two goals: economic attrition. Oil sales fund Russia's military machine. Cut those revenues and Russia struggles to buy weapons, pay soldiers, and sustain logistics. Psychological pressure. For ordinary Russians, the war was always somewhere far away. Now, they are seeing explosions, fires, and blackouts in their own cities. And let's not forget, last winter, Russia tried to freeze Ukrainians into submission by bombing Ukraine's power grid. Millions lived without electricity or heating. Now, the situation is turning around. Ukrainians are showing Russia what it feels like when energy infrastructure becomes the target. Now, let's move from explosions to words. Igor Girkin, one of the most infamous Russian ultranationalists, known for his aggressive pro-war stance, has suddenly changed his rhetoric. For months, Girkin called for escalation, for full mobilization, for harsher measures. But in his latest statements, there's a noticeable change. Instead of shouting about inevitable Russian victory, he's talking about potential collapse, about corruption in the system, and about the inability of the Kremlin to adapt. Why does this matter? Because Girkin speaks for a certain faction of Russia's elites and military bloggers. When his tone shifts, it often reflects growing cracks inside the Russian power structure. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Donald Trump has made another surprising comment about the war in Ukraine. While Trump has often been vague about his position, this time he hinted that Russia's actions are unsustainable in the long run. Is this a signal? It could be an early sign of how US policy might change after the elections. Even if Trump often sends mixed messages, the fact that he acknowledges Russia's vulnerability is important. For Ukraine, American political support is critical. And for Russia, the idea that even Trump sees weakness in Moscow's position is a psychological blow. Finally, let's talk about Minsk. Putin and Lukashenko held a rare 5-hour meeting behind closed doors. Official statements were vague, but the length of the meeting itself speaks volumes. What could they have discussed? The growing military pressure from Ukraine, the strikes deep inside Russia, Lukashenko's own fears of instability spilling over into Belarus. Lukashenko depends on Putin for survival, and the stakes have never been higher. But he also knows that tying himself too closely to a sinking ship could be dangerous. The fact that they needed 5 hours, instead of the usual short photo op, shows that serious problems are on the table. When we step back and look at the full picture, it becomes painfully obvious that the Ukrainian strikes are not just isolated incidents. They are systematically unraveling the Russian economy. Oil infrastructure is under constant attack. Refineries are unable to operate at full capacity, and gasoline shortages are spreading from one region to another, creating cascading effects across industries. Every delay in repairs, every drone strike, and every logistical failure adds pressure not just on the fuel market, but on transportation, manufacturing, and even retail sectors. Inflation is rising at rates that were unimaginable just a year ago, eroding the purchasing power of ordinary Russians and putting immense stress on businesses that rely on predictable supply chains. The banking sector, once a pillar of stability, has already shown alarming signs of weakness, with profits halving in a single month and loans going unpaid. As this economic squeeze continues, social tension is likely to grow. Public dissatisfaction, shortages of essential goods, and rising prices could spark unrest in cities across the country. Politically, the Kremlin may be forced to shift focus from military ambitions to internal stability, as funding the war becomes increasingly impossible without a functioning economy. And if you want to follow this story as it unfolds, don't forget to subscribe. You'll get in-depth updates and analysis on how these economic pressures are reshaping Russia and the global balance of power. Over the coming months, unless there is a dramatic change, we are likely to see a prolonged period of economic degradation in Russia, one that will not only limit its military operations, but also deeply affect the daily lives of millions of people. This is a situation that cannot be ignored, and one that will continue to evolve with every new development on the ground. Let's put it all together. Ukraine's drone strikes are crippling Russia's oil infrastructure. In the US, Trump's words hint at shifting political winds. And in Belarus, Lukashenko and Putin are clearly worried about what comes next. The picture is clear. Russia is under pressure from all sides. Militarily, economically, politically. The walls are closing in. And as this war drags on, we will see more signs of strain, more cracks in the system, and more desperate moves from the Kremlin. This is no longer just about the front lines in Ukraine. This is about the survival of Russia's entire power structure. Stay with us, because the next few weeks could bring even more dramatic changes.